And the second question is, ah, oh my gosh, I think this is an even more controversial question. Okay, so for anyone who has been a believer for a long time, and it belongs to that in that big umbrella of Protestant, church and all its denominations, we have all heard about Todd White, right? Some people love him who are more uh, ultra core Pentecostals and charismatic. Some people like me, we are prone to just be skeptical by nature and like, hey, I don't want to just have blind faith and believe everything I hear from other people. So over time, Todd White has extended or expanded his street ministry, but all these supposedly healings where he would see people, he would like, hey, I saw that your legs are not aligned. Can you lay down? And I'll like help, through me, God will heal you, help you walking. And some Christian apologists and theologians will be like, well, look, the technique he's using, he's not aligning. There is a catch, there is a trick, there's no healing. And I became so disappointed, so suspicious years ago. And for me now, unfortunately, this name is associated with false healings or false alignments of legs. So it just bugs me, and I wanted to ask, in your research, what do you think about all these supposedly faith healers who, it's not just about this name. I have nothing personal against this person. I'm just giving example as, we know these people, faith healers, coming from all these churches, yet even though they may call themselves as faith healers, they themselves are not always healed. They die. And sometimes the testimony of supposed healings and miracles come back as to be, no, these people, these patients were not actually healed. So I just wanted to hear your opinion.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I actually have a whole chapter on faith healers in the book. I share your skepticism. I think most big ministries have a lot of motivation for lying to get money, right? Especially they're making a lot of money. So you'd be very careful about that. And as you said, the leg lengthening thing is a common trick. You pull the shoe out a little bit so it looks like the leg's growing. And that's something where they know that they're lying, right? They know that they're conning people. I don't know if you've ever heard of Peter Popoff before. He was a very famous case in the 80s where he would heal people, and not only heal people, but he would be able to say things like, "Oh, Sally, you live on this street," and he would tell things people about personal lives that they didn't know, right? And this was a miracle. Well, James Randi, who is a magician, came in and he found out that the healings were being fake, that this was a lot of placebo stuff. And he found out that they signed prayer cards at the beginning of these ministries that were collected. And these prayer cards, they would put personal information. So Peter Popoff they noticed there was plastic in his ear. And they said, well, either he has a hearing aid, which is weird if he's a healer, right? Or he's having an earpiece. And so they actually intercepted the waves and they played this on TV. But his wife was in a van using a walkie-talkie, reading them off, saying, okay, Barbara is in the third row. She has arthritis. And Papa would be like, God is telling me, Barbara, where are you with arthritis? Yes, the Holy Spirit is telling me this. And taking people's money, complete con artist, right? And so when he was exposed, he went bankrupt. But he's still in business today, by the way. He sells miracle spring water now that you can buy. Miracle water that'll solve all your debts, cure any disease, all this stuff that you can buy for, 3 easy payments of $19.99 or whatever it is. So he's still conning people for money, unfortunately. But it is a truth. If you know Benny Hinn, very famous faith healer as well, there was a whole expose on him where they found out that he was basically, people in his staff were deliberately excluding people who were like actually sick. So they take people who had cancer or stuff that wasn't very visible, right? And they think they were healed. But there would be people who come with like their kids had cerebral palsy in a wheelchair or missing limbs, like really serious diseases, and they would like say, no, you're not going to go on stage. Like he's not going to pray for you, and deliberately so picking people who would be easy to do. So very disgusting things, and it's really sad. But I also try not to. I try to be open-minded, not so open-minded where I'm just gullible, but I do try to keep it in mind. I don't say that can't happen, that there can't be ministries like that, but we should definitely be skeptical. There was one faith healer who I think actually has some pretty credible cases, and that her name would be Catherine Kuhlman, and she died in the 70s, but she was very weird and eccentric, and there were plenty of people who she prayed for who were not healed. So I'll say that there was a doctor who investigated her, and he followed up on 10 people, and all those 10 people were actually not healed, or they had placebo effect or something. So she never claimed that she could heal everyone. I'm not saying that, but there were a lot of really interesting cases, and I talk about them in the book, of people who got better with medical documentation. She was one of the only faith healers who actually, in order for you to give a testimony on her show, you had to have medical documentation of the disease that got better. So she actually was trying to be pretty good, and she had a lot of friends who were medical doctors. And there was a book published in the 70s by Richard Kazadorf, who was a John Hopkins doctor who worked at, I think it was a Heart Center in California. It was Long Beach Hospital, I think it was, which is a pretty well-respected hospital. It's a national landmark now. But he wrote a book where he had 10 cases of people, and he had pictures of X-rays and scans stuff pre and post. And some of the cases are really remarkable. I think the best one of hers was a woman who had severe, a woman in her 30s who had severe osteoporosis, which is where your bones thin up, right? So when she was 30 years old, she had the bones of a 70-year-old woman, and her spine, literally, like the vertebrae would pop out, they would disconnect, and she had to have 4 surgeries where they had to connect it back. And every time it would only temporarily work and it would pop out again. So after the 4th time, they said, look, we can't fix this. There's nothing we can do. So they had to give her a cordotomy, this was back in, I think, the 60s when she had this happen. But before, they had a lot of opioids and painkillers. A cordotomy was like something they only give to terminal patients, only if you're dying of like cancer and you don't have long to live anyway, just to relieve your pain. They go in and they basically sever the nerves to where you have no feeling on the side of your body at all. So she was in such pain, no pain medicine works. They literally did this to where she had no feeling in her body, like on the left side and then on her leg down. And that worked for a little bit, but then she had a bad fall and the pain came back. And so she had basically spent years, and this is a woman in her 30s, mind you, with the bones of a 70-year-old woman. Her her vertebrae kept popping out. She had to have a collar, a neck collar, and she had to have a back brace. She was in bed, I think, 22 hours a day. She can only get up for maybe 3 hours a day and do it. So she was in absolute hell, absolute pain. And she'd had there was an x-ray taken in August. She was healed in 1970, I think 1975, and there was an x-ray taken a month before that showed her getting worse, and her doctor was like, yeah, she probably only has a few months to live at this point. But she goes to a conference where Catherine Coleman is giving a lecture. She wasn't even doing it, and Coleman was not even praying for her. Coleman was praying for someone else on stage. And while Coleman is praying for her, Dolores is in the audience in her big body cast and her big collar on there. And she starts feeling like this kind of heat pain in the back of her neck. And at first she thought it was like she was putting pressure on like her vertebrae, and that's what it was doing it. But she gets up and she goes outside and she's very uncomfortable. And there was a doctor who follows her out of there who was in the audience. And he's like, what's wrong? And she's like, I don't know. My neck feels really funny. And he's like, look, you're gonna have to trust me on this, but I feel like God's healed you. I have the Holy Spirit doing that. So reluctantly, they go back on stage and they tell Coleman what happened. So she takes off her collar, takes off the body cast, and starts walking for the first time. Now, mind you, she couldn't walk normally prior to this because she had no feeling in her body, right? So before this, she had to shuffle. She couldn't move her legs up. She had to shuffle on the ground. So she lifts her legs up and starts doing it. She doesn't have pain. She goes back to her doctor a few days later, and Kastorf has the records and the x-rays. Her vertebrae now is connected. Her spine is completely straight. The scar of where it was sticking out is closed over. She has no more pain. Again, her spine's straight. She can't even fit into her body cast now because she can stand up straight. She doesn't have the scoliosis and the osteoporosis. Doesn't need the collar anymore. Is completely healed and completely symptom-free. Now, take in mind, osteoporosis is a disease that does not have a cure. You can treat it to where it reduces symptoms, but this is something where it only gets worse with age. So she'd had this in her 30s. It had gotten worse for, I think, 16 years she'd had this, where it got progressively worse and worse. Treatments did not help at all. Like, the surgeries clearly didn't have effect. But she was healed, and this was in the 70s. She died, I believe, in the early 2010s at the age of 80 or so. So she was healed for 40 years in complete health, didn't get any worse, completely healed, no symptoms returned, no relapse, which again is unheard of considering how bad of a condition she had been in before then, terminal. So that's a case from Catherine Coleman. I don't agree with everything Catherine Coleman has ever said, but I think you could say God works through people, and I think that's a case that's just so remarkable where I just can't ignore and just say, oh yeah, that's just psychosomatic, right? And especially if there's documentation to back it up. So I think it's just a remarkable case and really uplifting. And she became a pastor after that. She had her own healing ministry. Dolores did, the woman who was healed. And she'd pray for people and try to heal them too. So she felt like that was what God wanted her to do, to try to give that to other people. So